I'm Batman.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Get to the chopper!
Discussing movies, this is Brian's review show.
Well, you did some pushing of your own, John.
They drew first blood, not me.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Bond. James Bond.
And you're very welcome to episode 2 of Brian's review show, discussing movies in depth and with some analysis and a bit of banter along the way as well. Today's film is Predator 2. Now, you might recall in episode 1, I discussed the very first film, Predator, which of course was released in 1987. Now, the sequel is the topic of discussion on this podcast episode today, Predator 2. And Predator 2 was released on November 21st, 1990, and the film stars Danny Glover, Gary Busey, Ruben Blades, Bill Paxton, Robert Davi, and Maria Conchita Alonso. The film tells the story of Lieutenant Mike Harrigan and his police force who try to hunt down a vicious alien hunter killing drug gangs in Los Angeles despite the warnings of a mysterious government agent. Now, the film sees the return of the creature, the Predator, from the very first film that starred Arnold Schwarzenegger, and no actor returned from the first film, except, of course, Kevin Peter Hall, who plays the Predator in this film as well. But no actor returned from the very first film onto the second film. There is a brief mention of the characters from the first film when Gary Busey's character, Peter Keyes, discuss basically the previous adventure that involved the Predator when he was in Earth. This film, of course, is set in Los Angeles in 1997, the future set of Los Angeles, and involves gang wars and this really gritty, dark world. And the Predator is brought, if you've seen the first film, you'll recall that the first film took place in a jungle, whereas the second film takes place in the city of Los Angeles, which provides a different type of jungle for the Predator to hunt his victims. Now, first off the bat, this film wasn't as successful as the very first film, critically or box office in terms of figures in the box office. But I think one thing it has gained over time, quite like the first film in many ways, is that it has gained a cult following. I'm very much a fan of this film. I think it's a brilliant sequel. For me, it is the best sequel to the Predator original. From the original one is the best. There's no question about it. But the second one does have its qualities. The casting, I think, is another brilliant reason why this film works so well. Bill Paxton is, anything Bill Paxton is in, I love discussing. This is another one of his roles that I always enjoy going back rewatching. He plays the character of Jerry Lambert. Gary Busey is also brilliant in this as well. He plays Peter Keyes, who of course is a government agent who's mysteriously hunting down the Predator for his own reasons as well. Danny Glover, of course, was famous at that point for being in films like Witness with Harrison Ford or The Color Purple with Whoopi Goldberg a couple of years before. And then, of course, he went on to have national and international acclaim with his films with Mel Gibson, of course, the legendary Lethal Weapon films. But this film is kind of a solo effort to kind of bring his persona from the Lethal Weapon films into this film, and I think it works. I really do enjoy Danny Glover's performance in this film. What I quite like about the film, there's some aspects that are maybe slightly negative. The aspects I do quite enjoy in this film is just the dark, gritty world it presents, because it's set 10 years after the events of the first film, and the film focuses on the Predator and kind of his advanced extraterrestrial hunter that he is, and the efforts he is faced against with this disgruntled police officer and his allies who try to defeat the creature. There's just so many characters that are brought in this film. I don't think the characters are quite as good or as strong as they were in the first film. Like the first film was just worked on so many levels. It really did. I think the writing was brilliant. The cinematography was fantastic. The music just added that bit of, from Alan Silvestri, just added that bit of atmosphere to the film as well. And To be fair, Alan Silvestri returns to this film, and I like that he adds that bit of grittiness once again that he brought from the first film into the second film. That's one aspect of the film that I really did enjoy. The Thomas brothers, of course, returned to write this sequel. Jim and John Thomas, who created the characters from the original film. Now, the production notes were interesting for this film because once they approached the screenwriters Jim and John Thomas to write a sequel, they pitched many ideas from putting the creature into an urban jungle, which was the setting that they went for. But the goal of the sequel would be to expand on the predator's origins and motives and showing the creature has been visiting the planet for centuries. And this is kind of referenced throughout the film. And for fans of Alien, of course, as well, you can see the xenomorph skeleton in the tunnel that Danny Glover's character goes into later on in the film. But Joel Silver invited director Stephen Hopkins. Now, Stephen Hopkins was very famous at the time for being involved in A Nightmare on Elm Street 5. Hopkins was approached. There was talks, of course, of John McTiernan possibly returning to direct the sequel, who directed the first film, but he decided not to come back for this film. Arnold Schwarzenegger was also approached about coming into this film to reprise his role as Dutch from the first film. Patrick Swayze was also mentioned, which was interesting. I thought that he was considered for the role of Harrigan. And Steven Seagal was also mentioned as well. He was actually went as far as meeting Stephen Hopkins, the director, which would have been an interesting dynamic. But due to a dispute over salary, Schwarzenegger did decline to return to the sequel. Of course, he went on to make another legendary film, which of course was Terminator 2. But Silver decided to bring in a couple of actors that were in the Lethal Weapon films that he worked on. Gary Busey, for one, he was in the very first Lethal Weapon. Steve Kahn played the kind of lieutenant in the Lethal Weapon films, the captain, you may say. And he comes in, he's kind of in a smaller role in this film where he's working under Harrigan. And Danny Glover, of course, is the man that takes on the main role of Harrigan, the protagonist that takes on the Predator. Now, Stan Winston returns once again to design the Predator's outfit and effects and special effects in the film. And Stan Winston said that the broad concept's the same. The difference is that this is a different individual of the same species. As in, a snake is a snake, but different snakes are different. Their colorings are different. And this is the approach that he decided to go with. The writers decided to set Predator 2 10 years after the original, and this led them to kind of, I suppose they were probably inspired by a Blade Runner type of Los Angeles, and this is what they want to kind of show in the sequel. Now, the film was released on November 21st, 1990, and Predator 2 was fourth at the US box office in its opening weekend with a gross of 8 million behind the likes of The Dances with Wolves, 3 Men and a Little Lady, and Rocky 5. The film went on to gross $57 million, 30 million of which was from the United States. The critical response was generally negative, though reviewers were generally impressed by the casting of Danny Glover as an action hero. The Washington Post at the time said that they enjoyed the film, but they felt that it had the dismal irony of a RoboCop and a kind of a Blade Runner mixed together. Also, another critic said that it was very unoriginal and unnecessarily violent, but did praise Danny Glover's acting in the film. Also, another reviewer from the New York Times suggested that it was an unbeatable contender for the most mindless, mean-spirited action film of the holiday season. The film is often viewed as being underrated and has come to be considered a cult classic. I would be very much in that camp. I think it is very much underrated as a sequel. I think I always enjoy going back watching this film. Very much like the first one, it is very much enjoyable. It is the best of the sequels for me to the first one. The one thing I do like about this film, it tries to add more to the character of the Predator and to expand in this world that the Predator is in, and providing the setting of Los Angeles, I think, was inspired decision just to bring it from an urban to a jungle setting. I think the jungle setting worked a lot better, to be honest, for the alien creature, but I still quite enjoyed seeing the Predator being in Los Angeles. Now, Danny Glover plays Lieutenant Mike Harrigan, who is the LAPD officer who is investigating rival Jamaican and Colombian drug cartels, but he is stubborn and is very much chasing the Predator. Kevin Peter Hall returns as the Predator, of course, the city hunter, And also Gary Busey is a new character that's in this film. He is the special agent Peter Keyes. Now, the interesting thing I thought about this character, Peter Keyes, is that the character is actually a replacement for Dutch, because the protagonist of the first film, Arnold Schwarzenegger, was actually going to take up a similar role like this, basically hunting down the predator creature from the first film, but he declined to come back for this film. Ruben Blades is another main character. He plays Danny. Detective Danny, that is. He's a member of Harrigan's team and a longtime friend of his. Maria Conchita Alonso plays Leona, Detective Leona Cantrell, who is an LAPD cop involved in this gang war investigation. Bill Paxton, of course, is in this film too. He plays Detective Jerry Lambert, and Robert Davi's in a kind of a smaller role as a deputy chief, Phil. And Adam Baldwin's also in this film too. He plays Agent Adam. Aspects I liked this one. There's a particular scene. Now, there's spoilers ahead now for people that haven't seen the film I'm about to discuss. But the scenes I particularly enjoyed in this film, because I've seen it multiple times, so it's very much in my mind. The scene when Detective Danny, goes back to the building where the Jamaicans were first discovered, their bodies were discovered. The Predator was there earlier in the film, where he stopped and disrupted and killed many Jamaican and Colombian cartels. But Danny, the Lieutenant Harrigan's character, his friend, partner, comes back on his own to just check out, have a closer investigation, because he's kicked out by the government agents that are led by Peter Keyes. So he comes back later into the night. It's kind of a dark, the music, the setting, it's all very isolated and very mysterious, and just the scene sets up this great suspense setup, and it gave you that brilliant nod to the very first film, I thought, just in terms of when if you go back to the very first film, Bill Duke's character Mac, when he's kind of on his own, thinking about his friend Blaine. But I just love the way the scene is shot, him going back into the building on his own, not knowing the danger that's there waiting for him, and just that whole build up I thought was fantastic. The suspense that it builds, he finds this clue, this weapon that belongs to the Predator, but the Predator, of course, surprises him by using the voice of Lieutenant Harrigan that he picked up earlier in the film to surprise Danny, which leads to his demise. The opening scene I thought was quite strong as well, when you see the Predator's view point very quickly, a lot quicker than you did in the first film. That's to take note of as well. I suppose the audience and viewers of the first film would be very much aware of the Predator already, so they kind of know what to expect when seeing him. But it's just interesting looking at how the Predator kind of observes this big shooter that has taken place between different cartels and the cops as well, the LAPD. This is where we're first introduced to the main characters, Danny Glover's character, Harrigan, and Leona as well. And as I already mentioned, Danny. So we kind of get to know the characters that we're going to be following for the rest of the picture. Jerry Lambert, which is Bill Paxton's character, he doesn't come in till later in the film. And he's kind of a film that Bill Paxton was very much famous for was Aliens, the James Cameron classic, and he had many famous quotes in that film. And what I quite like about this film as well, that his character Jerry Lambert is very much like Hudson from Aliens. There's so many kind of quotable lines he has in the movie. For example, the couple of lines he says, my balls are fine. How are yours? He says to Leona, which I thought was quite funny when he's on the dance floor. And he also, there's loads of other different lines as well. He says, "Let's dance" to the Predator, and he says to Lieutenant Harrigan, tracking is my speciality. Just the way he says it, Bill Paxton, he's a great addition to the film and adds a bit of humour. Although, to be fair, there was bits of humour in the first one. I think there's slightly more humour in this one. To be honest, the scene when the Predator is kind of fixing his wound, and there's an old lady beside him in the apartment, and she's like, "What's that noise?" And the Predator's shouting, and you can hear the loud noise he makes when he's trying to cut open his skin to to fix the wound that he has. But that kind of humor is there as well. It's great. I quite like the team that's built up here. Between Leona and Harrigan and Danny and Jerry Lambert as well. It's a good kind of a strong four unit there, that kind of characters you can relate to which I quite like. That's the one strength I think that the first one had that this one also brings. In fairness, not quite as good, but to be fair, a decent amount of character development is shown in this film, and you do get to like the character of Harrigan as well in this movie, which is another aspect which is fantastic as well. Um, the chase scenes are pretty decent as well. The long chase scene between Harrigan and the Predator is quite entertaining, I think. And even Gary Busey in this film is fantastic. The lines he has, this, the whole sequence when he's describing the Predator to Harrigan, he's like, he says, "It comes from safari, lions, tigers, the bears. Oh my!" And he's describing the events of the first film, which is a nice nod to the first one. He's like, 10 years ago, elite forces unit discovered this creature in the jungle. There were two survivors, and this kind of stuff, which is it's a nice reference point to the first film, which I quite enjoyed. But just Gary Busey's over the top, his lines in it, a fucking alien and all this kind of stuff. It's brilliant stuff. Just great entertainment. That's what films are all about. If you're entertained by a film, which this provides, that's what you want at the end of the day. Just good old solid entertainment, and this one provides it with a bit of humor along the way as well. Get out of here, Harrigan! I'm going to save your ass. And all this is just fantastic, and quality banter between characters. Some of the critics give out about the script of the film, how it's very unnecessarily violent, and I kind of get it, but I do enjoy that. So to be honest, I'm a fan of it, and you don't really kind of see that as much in newer films. I think it's very much in that era of movie from the 80s, from probably 70s, 80s into the 90s. That was very much the humor in those kind of films. So, it's one to enjoy for sure. Ruben Blades, I think, is quite good in this movie as well as Danny. He provides the problem I have with his character is not so much his acting or anything. It's actually he's not in the film long enough. But when he is in the film, he's a good character. You get to you can tell Harrigan and himself have been partners for years and years, and it's a disappointment when he's cut out of the film quite early into maybe nearly an hour into the film, but he's kind of missed in the showdown. Leona's a good character too. In fairness, she's a solid female supporting character to the film as well. So there's a lot to like about the film. Even King Willie is a good character in the film as well. You can't see the eyes of the demon until he come calling, that kind of stuff. It's all brilliant stuff. Just the whole, to be honest, I think the cinematography is the big one that really sells this film. That's what Predator does very well. The first two films, anyway, is the cinematography. I think it's a strong suit. In the first film, the cinematography was absolutely fantastic. From Donald McAlpine, who did brilliant cinematography in the very first film, but in the second film, the cinematography is taken over by Peter Levy. Peter Levy does a brilliant job in terms of cinematography in this movie. Anyway, he worked on other films. I think Blown Away and Lost in Space were two other films he worked on, but he does a pretty good job of providing a gritty kind of a set to Los Angeles. We've kind of seen gritty kind of Los Angeles in Blade Runner, and he's kind of used that as inspiration going into this film, which I quite enjoyed. The special effects are quite good in this movie. The invisibility of the Predator is very strong. Once again, there's a great shot of the Predator when he's confronting King Willie, and you kind of see the Predator's footprints going through the water, and you can see the electric shock that his presence provides, and the suspense and the music. It all works beautifully. Alan Silvestri's music, again, as I mentioned earlier, is phenomenally brings that class that he had in the first film into the second film. So there is a lot to like about this movie. There really is. Negatives about the film. As much as I praise the gritty look of it, there is kind of probably a dirty. I don't know if dirty the right word, but there's kind of a dirty look to the film that is not really shown in the first film. Which is it's kind of there, and it doesn't quite wash off as you're watching it. It's a slight negative really, but it's not. It doesn't really put me off the film too much really. Some of the dialogue with the Colombian and the Jamaicans is a lot to be desired. I think some of it is quite good, and some of it is just a bit out there. But I suppose they had to develop those types of characters. The one thing I wish I would have I think I mentioned earlier was that Danny Glover's partner, played by Ruben Blades. I wish I would have seen more of him in the film. I think it was a great shame that there wasn't more development with his character. Um, I think looking back, the villains, like, I think when you can just, if you think about it for a second, just comparing the first one to the second one, you know, Arnold Schwarzenegger's character Dutch or Harrigan, they're two good main characters in the film tracking down the predator. That's two brilliant characters, really. Then if you take Anna from the first Predator, and then you take Leona, uh, they show they're not quite the same character, but they show kind of different qualities. I suppose, see, Bill Paxton's character is kind of different in this one because there's not really a character like that. From the first film, there's a kind of a mix maybe of possibly Mac to maybe Blaine, maybe from the first film is kind of thrown into Bill Paxton's character. Ruben Blades, certainly, he's more kind of a kind of a Billy type from the first one. Sonny Landham's character from the very first film, he's kind of more, he's a mix of that. He's tough and he's a tracker, kind of like Billy from the first film. But the similarity is not exactly the same, but there's a similarity there. Peter Key's Gary Busey's character, he's for sure an over the top version of Carl Weathers' character from the first film, Dylan. I think, anyway, that's my perspective looking at it. I think again, the similarities, they come from a government agent background type thing, and they're kind of like tracking down the predator. The only thing is that Dylan, he's very much loyal to the team, whereas Gary Busey, I think Gary Busey's character is kind of taken from the Aliens film series, where they're kind of, he wants to preserve the predator and to research it and to understand this type of creature. So he's not really out to kill the creature. He's kind of more out to freeze it and to study it and to analyze it and to learn as much as possible from the creature. Whereas Carl Weathers' character Dylan, he's more kind of covering up a government job where he's not, he doesn't know about the predator as such. So there's a slight difference there. But in terms of being loyal to the government side of things, that's where the similarity maybe is there. Um, but Gary Busey's character, he's not really an outright villain. Really, he's there to he's researching about the predator. He's learning about the predator, whereas Danny Glover's character is all about revenge and tracking the predator and stopping in his words, the motherfucker. That's his objective, is to do that. And that's, when you're watching the film, that's what you're observing throughout. As the film goes on, I quite like it's a negative but a positive. The train sequence in the film, some of it is brilliantly shot. It really is the tension that it's building. It reminded me of Death Wish, actually, the very first Death Wish, and I suppose even more recently the Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. I think that train sequence, and I suppose there's elements of the French Connection there as well, in terms of providing tension on the train setting. And there's, it's a good tension builder. You have Leona and Jerry both on the train, and then you kind of see flashes of the predator. That's the negative side of it. You don't see enough of the predator, really. He's kind of up on top of the roof, and then he's gone, and then again, and then even the killings of the predator, they're not quite clear on the train. So you're kind of following his shadow and his vision, and it's very dark. And Bill Paxton is, in terms of acting wise, is brilliant in it. When Leona goes back to try and find out what happened to Jerry in the film, later on in the sequence, there's a good eerie atmosphere to the music that's building up there, and what she discovers then, and then the predator showing itself then, and that's good tension, good builder. And the sequence then when Harrigan goes after the predator and he sees basically a man's head been chopped off by the predator, he's like, oh, he goes nuts, and that whole chase sequence is building all the time. And there's a couple of nice little nods to the Alien franchise. As I mentioned earlier, there's a skeleton of the xenomorph. You can kind of see Predator, as you would have known, when he kills a victim, he kills, he collects them as trophies. So he has the skeleton, the skull, and he places them in kind of a trophy cabinet display type thing. And you see the xenomorph there on the wall as well. So that's a nice little nod to the Alien films, I thought. And the spaceship, even, it's very similar to the spaceship that you see in the very first Alien film. Not exactly the same, of course, but just a nice little reference to that kind of, they're kind of in the same world type thing, which I thought was quite pretty cool. Now the sequence in the kind of I suppose, the ship at the end of the film when it's Harrigan taking on the Predator, and then after the battle commences and ends, groups of other Predators come, and Harrigan then is presented. The lead Predator gives Harrigan a gun with the name Raphael Adolini inscribed on it. And in Dark Horse, the short story in Predator 1718, Adolini was a pirate who joined forces with it to kill the men who betrayed him for treasure, which I think is an interesting nod. But the thing that presents that particular item in the film is that it shows that the Predator was on Earth before many centuries ago. Before that, so this was, remember, set in 1997. So this gun was going back to 1718. That is presented to Harrigan at the end of the film. So it's a nice little nod to show that the Predator had been on Earth before, centuries before that. And it's kind of referenced in the first one as well. Anna talks about it to the operatives in the jungle when she says that her uncles and aunts and her family talked about this creature that came to Earth many years ago, but butchering the community. So what this implies is that the Predator that presents the gun to Harrigan actually helped the captain on its ship to rebel its crew, and the Predator basically says to Harrigan, "Take it." So he takes it as kind of a souvenir, and then when the government agents then come back, Peter Keyes, other men come back to Harrigan and say, "What have you done to the creature?" And Harrigan says, "You'll get your chance, asshole," which implies that the predators will be back again to Earth at some point. So it's just the ending I thought was was wide open again for a sequel very soon to that. Of course, the sequel actually never came to a Predator film, a proper sequel or a solo sequel that is, until 2010 with the release of Predators, and Alien versus Predator, of course, is in between those two films as well. So it's a nice ending actually. It's a powerful ending to it. So that was another strong positive aspect of the film, I thought. Now, just a couple of interesting trivia facts from the film. The filming of the alley scene was very troublesome for the filmmakers due to the rough neighborhood. The alley was littered with garbage, most of which was used in the film, and plagued with large rats. Local residents, angered by the noise created by the film crew, would throw bottles and paper bags filled with feces from windows at the crew in the alley below. And worst of all, the film crew found a dead body hidden among the garbage. The most horrible places I've ever had to film in were the alleys in downtown Los Angeles, Shane Mahan commented. And Predator 2 was shot in a lot of those disgusting alleys. They were dirty, depressing, and gross, with people peeing on walls. We'd be rigging something, and there would be rats there. Now, as we mentioned earlier, Arnold Schwarzenegger said no to Predator 2 because of a dispute over money. According to producer John Davis, it was over an additional $250,000 the studio refused to pay him. Interestingly, the original storyline of the film was to have taken place in New York City, but Jim Thomas and John Thomas quickly changed it to Los Angeles because of budget concerns. The scene where the Predator raises the skull during the lightning storm was to have taken place on top of the Chrysler building. John McTiernan, who was the original director of the first Predator, went on to have great success with Die Hard the year after that, and his fee was $2 million. That's what he declined to direct this movie because the executives wanted to keep the budget the same as of the first film. In a backstory explaining Dutch's absence from the sequel, Keyes had learned of Dutch's encounter with the Predator and tracked him down to a hospital. Dutch was being treated for radiation sickness, thought to be a result of exposure to the Predator's self-destruct device. After hearing Dutch's account of events, Keyes and the OWLF team were sent to the jungle to investigate and study the site where the Predator detonated the device. They found evidence of a spaceship launch in the jungle, and the deceased Predator's ship had automatically returned to the Predator home world. Dutch later escaped from the hospital and vanished, and Keyes believed he was still alive. So yeah, that's an interesting fact that I doing research on this film that I didn't know myself. So that's it would have been interesting to see how they would have approached Schwarzenegger to join the sequel here. But yeah, it's an interesting one that for sure. According to Gary Busey in an interview, after the events of the first film, Keyes and the CIA had been conducting missions in the jungles in which Dutch had been involved, but they had lost Dutch. This explains why Dutch didn't appear in the sequel. This is the first film that Gary Busey made after he nearly fatally crashed in his motorcycle accident. At one point, as I mentioned earlier, Patrick Swayze was approached to star in the film, but was unable to because he was injured during the filming of Roadhouse. John Lithgow was Stephen Hopkins' first choice for Peter Keyes, but Joel Silver pushed for Gary Busey instead. And just going back to Schwarzenegger's admission from the film, Stephen Hopkins, the director of this movie, said that Arnold Schwarzenegger refused a supporting role not because he didn't like the script, he refused it because he didn't want to postpone the filming of Kindergarten Cop from 1990, which started filming in October. Hopkins said he was relieved because if Arnold was ultimately on board, massive script rewrites would have been necessary. This source is from Impact Magazine from the 2nd of April 1991. Yeah, that's just some trivia facts there about Predator 2. A very underrated sequel, in my opinion. I think it's got more love certainly over the years. Um, it's not as again, it's not as good as Predator, but if you take it for what it is, it's very much a decent sequel to the first one. And for me, it is the best sequel to the first one. The sequels that followed it just weren't as good as the first one. This one at least tried to do something different by bringing the creature into an urban setting in Los Angeles in this case. Just thinking back to when I watched this film first, I luckily I'd seen the first one first, the 1987 classic, so I was really looking forward to seeing the second one. And when I first watched it, I did enjoy it when I first watched it. I think I've actually enjoyed it more going back rewatching it again. It's just one of those it's kind of one of those comfort films. It's always a good watch. You know what you're getting when you go into it, so it's very much a good watch for sure. And that concludes the episode 2 of this podcast, Brian's review show, discussing movies, a bit of trivia, bit of banter along the way as well. And I hope you enjoyed this episode, which covered Predator 2. Keep an eye out for more episodes in future discussing other classic movies. Hope you enjoyed the podcast, and as I always say, I hope, if anything, that I've either kindled your interest, rekindled the interest to watch Predator 2, or to maybe you're curious after seeing the first one that you want to watch the second one. So let's hope that happens as well, because in my opinion, it is very much worth watching. I'd probably give it, if I was to rate it out of 10, maybe give it an 8 out of 10 or so. That's what I give it. It's very much a worthy sequel to the first one. Take care out there, folks, and keep an eye out for future podcast episodes.
I'm Batman.
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
Get to the chopper!
Discussing movies, this is Brian's review show.
Well, you did some pushing of your own, John.
They drew first blood, not me.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.
We better get back, because it'll be dark soon, and they mostly come at night. Mostly.
Go ahead. Make my day.
Bond. James Bond.